Welcome back to the Bible in Context,
where context is king and the original author's intent drives our interpretation.
And this time we're going to be looking at Isaac giving blessings to his sons Jacob and Esau. Now that they have been born and been striving together, we're going to see that striving relationship play out a little bit more.
Now, would you call the blessing to Esau a blessing?
It's like a parachute blessing.
It's not necessarily a curse, but almost.
I'm going to cushion the blow a little bit.
Yeah.
Give you a backup. Yeah, we'll actually talk about that because that one finds fulfillment too later in Scripture, but it saves him a little bit, I guess, in a way. But it also turns out to be a curse in a way, just because the way it plays out in the biblical story, it doesn't end well for Edom. It makes them enemies of Israel, but we'll talk about that.
Yes.
So, first of all, what's the setup here? So Isaac has been blessed. He is old. He's passed his test of staying in the land, even though there were some faults throughout that story in Genesis 26. And now he is blind, now that he's old. He can't see very well, and he favors his older son Esau because he can get good game. He can go hunt good meat. And so,
he's like every man. Allows his belly to control him.
There we go, yeah. That's exactly what he does here. So he asks Esau to go get him food before he can give him his final blessing. And something that you'll notice if you go through other blessings in Scripture, such as Jacob's blessing at the end of Genesis and Genesis 48, is, does he need any food in order to bless his kids or anything at all?
No.
He just says, everyone gather around and I'm going to give you my blessings. And so Isaac here, he makes a bad move, and he wants this desire fulfilled before he will give his blessing to Esau. Maybe this is a harmless request, but I think within the story there's already some negative connotations around Isaac's desire with his stomach in this story and the favoritism between the parents and the children here. So he makes a bad call, and also this request, it gives us some room within the narrative for Jacob to make a move.
Yes. So, and there's some similarities here to, I think, Noah's story, too, where you've got, after the flood, Noah got drunk and became very, what's the word I'm looking for?
Inebriated?
Well, inebriated, but also just he put himself in a position that somebody could take advantage of him.
Right.
And so now we've got Isaac here, who's old and blind and very much in a position where somebody can take advantage of him, and his son does.
That's a good point. Does that happen anywhere else in Genesis?
That's a great question.
Like post-Exodus, post-high point in their narrative, they have kind of a post-climax fall. Adam might be there because his climax was kind of at the Garden of Eden, but he also never passed his test, unlike Noah and Isaac.
Right.
So this might be something somewhat unique, although Jacob,
I was just thinking Jacob, yeah, because his sons take advantage of him in a sense and lie to him about Joseph.
Well, yeah, we're going to see this exact story reversed in the next couple of chapters anyway. I feel like you might be right with Jacob. At the same time, his entire story is a downhill story until the very end, so it's kind of hard to measure that one.
Yeah, at the end of Jacob's life, he was not a happy guy.
No. Well, his, in terms of the fall, his every turn that he makes he just is doing something else wrong until the very end.
Yeah.
All right, so anyway, maybe that's something we're supposed to pick up on. That's really cool. After his test, he does something kind of dumb that leaves himself
vulnerable. That's the word I was looking for.
Okay, yeah, that's right, vulnerable. He leaves himself vulnerable to one of his sons to take advantage and make a power play.
Right.
So, yeah, same thing happening over again here we saw with Noah. And this whole thing is actually Rebekah's idea. She comes into Jacob and she repeats Isaac's wish for food. And I think maybe this, just within this story here, this repetition of Isaac's request for food directly to Jacob from Rebekah might be just lengthening the amount of time you have to read to heighten the suspense and things like that. Just I want to pay attention to those little narrative markers because, again, it's a good story. Appreciate the story. Learn to appreciate it, and that'll help you be shaped by it as you read it. So she says to go and prepare a couple of goats instead of game for Esau so that they can use those to deceive Jacob. Jacob will masquerade as Esau and then take the blessing that blind Isaac meant to give to Esau for himself. One thing I think is worth pointing out here, because the English reader may catch in verse 8 where it says, bring me 2 goats, that, okay, yeah, this is the 2 goats motif. We're somehow hearkening back to that. Well, this time actually, no. I don't think this time, because the word there that is consistently used in Leviticus 16 and that has been used to link the brothers, which we see with Esau and Joseph, to the 2 goats motif is se'er. This is the Hebrew word ez.
Yeah, I had actually wondered that. I was like, why does he need 2 goats for this meal?
Well, in prepping actually for this, I saw that and forgot the Hebrew behind the English as I was kind of reading through it.
Right.
Like, oh, hey, I missed this. Like, what's going on here? Oh, that's what. Okay, it's ez, not se'er.
Yeah. So my theory is she needed 2 goats because she knew that she was going to use the skins to cover his hands, and so maybe 1 goat wasn't enough. I don't know.
Now I'm thinking, maybe there is something there a little bit, just because, okay, there are places, and we've talked this on the podcast and in the book, where the author will use conceptual similarities to link things. And so maybe, again, this is supposed to bring us back to, not to the 2 se'ir, but to the 2 az, the 2, just a different word for goats. So maybe there is something there, actually.
Yeah. I mean, why would you need 2 goats to eat?
Right. And I don't think that it is just having enough to cover, because usually the Bible isn't concerned with those practical issues,
right?
If that makes sense.
Yeah, it's an odd detail, but usually a lot of times those odd details are there for a reason. Yeah,
that was a good call out. Okay, I take it back. This is, I think, maybe something that's supposed to point us towards the 2 goats. Good call out.
We'll see. Well, I don't know. It's hard to tell.
Yeah, it is, but I think that is supposed to make us think, though. I mean, why 2? And 2 brothers, 2 goats. I think so the motif goes. So, all right. So here, Isaac's love of food is set up a window for Jacob to deceive him, to take this window of opportunity. And in verse 15, Rebekah, she clothes Jacob with skins. You just mentioned that, with the goat skins to make him feel hairy, just like Esau. Well, the last time we've seen these 2 words together, to clothe with skins, lavash and or, was in Genesis 3:21, whenever Yahweh clothed Adam and Eve with skins. And we saw back then that Yahweh was reinstating them in a priestly status, because the words used in Genesis 3:21, Yahweh made the clothes, he clothed them with the skins. And those 3 words, to make clothes and skins, were not used again until we saw Moses making and clothing Aaron. And so it's a call forward to the priestly installment of Aaron here after the fall. They're being reinstated to their priestly status. I don't think that Rebekah is making Jacob a priest.
No.
In this case.
No.
But I think what is happening here is she is putting him forward, doing her work.
Right.
That might be what's actually going on behind this.
Right.
And something else that it might be doing is, we're going to see at another place in Jacob's story, is that there is a sort of a parody of the priestly role that Jacob plays as the elect one. We saw how Abraham and Isaac, they give sacrifices and they kind of have a priestly role in some places. Jacob, he kind of has a reversed priestly role in some points. So maybe there's something about that too, just kind of poking at Jacob, saying like he is not the priest we're expecting.
Right. Okay, so there's another question that I had just from a couple verses before this. And so right before verse 15, what we see Jacob hesitant, and he's worried about his mom's plan. He's not worried about doing the wrong thing. He's worried about getting caught.
Right.
And he's worried about the consequences of him getting caught, and that his father, instead of blessing him, would actually curse him. And his mother says to him, "Let your curse be on me, my son. Only obey my voice and go bring them to me." And I'm just curious, do you think she's genuine in that offer, or is she manipulating him to go and do what she wants him to do?
I don't know if we have enough in the story to say, but either way, it's careless and reckless. I think what she's doing. But I think she has just an eye towards her favorite son becoming the family head, that she has some security in that fact alone, I think.
Security, how so?
If her favorite son is now the head of the household, then she'll be well taken care of. She'll be all right. That may be behind there, but I don't know if we're supposed to read too much into the taking of Jacob's curse if he received a curse.
Yeah, it's interesting too. I think I'm just meditating on Rebecca in this whole story, because she totally could have appealed to bless
Right.
Esau. You're supposed to bless Jacob to the prophecy, but instead she is super deceptive and isn't so much about the prophecy at all. It's more just because she favors Jacob.
Yeah, I don't think that the story really portrays her as a character who is really thinking all this through, because we're going to see at the end of this chapter, she's portrayed as just very arrogant.
Yeah.
As making promises she can't keep. And so I think maybe that's the same character, or we're seeing that same character play out here when she's like, forget it. Just let your curse be on me. Do what I say. It's going to work out. It's fine.
Yeah, that's right. Because this is later on. She makes another promise that she never really keeps.
Right. And then I think that promise is the cue that causes her to fall out of the narrative completely.
Yeah.
We'll talk about that though. Let's get back to verse 18 and then finish walking through this chapter, and then we'll see what happens to Rebekah. So in verses 18 through 25 in there, this is the exchange with Jacob masquerading as Esau with Isaac. And Isaac, he's blind, and he's smelling the skins, feeling the skins, hearing Jacob's voice, and he can tell something's not right, but he's convinced. It's really cool just reading this, seeing the suspense that is placed in the story as Jacob, he's almost caught, and then you're like, Jacob's going to figure this out. He knows it's Jacob's voice, and like, this is ridiculous. And then he's like, I guess you are Esau. So Isaac is just such a blind and gullible character in this part. But after this heightened suspense is over, and Isaac is ultimately fooled and been taken advantage of by his son, by his own stupidity in this part of the narrative. So maybe we should say something else just real quick about Isaac's blindness, because I've seen the interpretation a lot that Isaac's blindness is a spiritual blindness, and that's why he's such a negative character in this scene. But I don't know that spiritual blindness is actually what the author has in mind here.
Yeah, and as I've thought about this, I mean, I've seen that too in commentaries, and I do think that there might be something to the fact that he's allowed his appetite for delicious meat to, in a sense, influence him, and even in a sense, blind him. I mean, he should know that Jacob's the one that ought to have the blessing, but he's trying to redirect the blessing to his favorite son.
Yeah.
And I think by the end of the story, what happens is there's kind of a wake-up call. Like, Isaac finally comes to his senses and realizes, oh.
Yeah, we do see that actually in the final blessing that he gives that we see in chapter 28. But yeah, I don't know so much that, like you're saying, it's a spiritual blindness, but there is something going on here with he's in some kind of state where he can be taken advantage of, and then his own desires and his own loyalties are now to Esau and his food.
Right, right. And so he's trying to do what's wise in his own eyes.
Yeah. So,
in a sense.
Yeah, I think spiritually blind is a nice metaphor that fits the passage, but I wouldn't want to read too much into it from the text.
Right. Yeah, it's not even so much of a kind of a mystical blindness as like he's made these decisions and his desires have, in a sense, blinded him. But yeah, I don't know that I would call it spiritual blindness.
Yeah, I think the actual blindness here is just a vehicle for Jacob's deception within the story. And so after he has felt Esau's hairy arms and smelled his furry coat and then heard Jacob's voice, which should be kind of a telltale sign that, this is Jacob. He goes along with it and he gives Jacob this blessing in verses 28 and 29. It's going to sound very familiar. So he says, "See, the smell of my son is the smell of the field that the Lord has blessed. May God give you the dew of heaven and the fatness of the earth, and plenty of grain and wine. Let the people serve you, and nations bow down to you. Be Lord over your brothers, and may your mother's sons bow down to you. Cursed be everyone who curses you, and blessed be everyone who blesses you." All right. Some of this is conceptually similar, and then that last line at the very bottom is directly linking us back to the beginning of Genesis 12, where God tells Abraham, "Cursed be everyone who curses you, blessed is everyone who blesses you." And so we're also seeing here the conquering of nations, the firstborn over his brothers, the rulership of his brothers. We saw victory over enemies, linking us back to the crushing of the serpent all throughout the Abraham and Isaac stories. So we're seeing that same Abrahamic, Adamic promise being given here to Jacob.
Yeah, you say the promise of a land that's plentiful, a promise of you being a great nation. And then I do think it's interesting that in the second half of verse 29, there's almost this emphasis on you're going to be Lord over your brothers, and may your mother's sons bow down to you. And I think that's a reference back to the prophecy that was given at the beginning, or before he was born, to his mother.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's directly. Yeah, Isaac is trying to undo what God directly said, very explicitly. It's not just, oh, I didn't realize I did that, or maybe he kind of did it in a tangential way, but he directly tries to undo Yahweh's promise.
Yeah, because even in this chapter, there's emphasis on Esau being the older brother. Is mentioned a couple different times, and so the fact that he blesses who he thinks is the older brother is very much this is Jacob, or this is Isaac trying to really redirect that blessing to where he wanted it.
Right, and don't get caught up in the fact too that Rebekah is the one who received this. I think that to say, well, Isaac just didn't know, I think that's refrigerator logic. You're reading too much. You're trying to reconstruct the story in a way that's. It's not meant to be. I think we're supposed to understand that this has been proclaimed to the elect family, and they know it. He knows better.
Yeah.
So then in verse 30, once the blessing is over, the suspense picks up again as Esau, he comes in just as Jacob is leaving the room, and so you got this little moment oh, that was close. Then he also, he goes through, and we're given some detail, he prepares delicious food, just again heightening the suspense of he went through the same steps, and then he goes in and tells his father, okay, bless me now. And I'm very minded about the narrative, I feel like, in this section. And it's cool here that the author could just tell us that, oh, Esau didn't get the blessing. Jacob stole it, story's over. Bummer. But we go through the steps of seeing, okay, Esau, he now prepares the food. He now goes into Isaac. He now requests the blessing. And then Isaac freaks out and is like, oh, no, I already gave it to someone else. Who was that? So again, we're brought back into this suspense and this tension within the narrative. And what this ultimately does is Esau, in verse 34, it causes him to cry out, to tza'ak, which is the same word used to describe Abel's blood crying out from the ground in Genesis 4:10, and to describe the cry of the oppressed in Sodom and Gomorrah in Genesis 18 and 19. And it's the same word for cry that the Israelites will do in Exodus 2:23 under their oppression under Egypt. So, again, we have Jacob. He is the elect son who just received the blessing of the firstborn, or the blessing of the elect chosen one from Yahweh, and he's like the Egyptians. He's like Sodom and Gomorrah. He's like Cain. And Esau, this one who has associations with Nimrod and Ishmael, he's the oppressed. So, this story is just completely flipped upside down.
And I wonder if his crying out is meant to mirror a little bit of what we see in Isaac's response. He trembled very violently, and what is that like in the Hebrew?
Yes, it's repeated that Isaac trembled tremblingly, very, very much.
Right, it's the way that the Hebrew is presented. It's very emphatic. You couldn't say it any stronger. His response, and I love that about this story, that it kind of brings you into the story to not just see what's going on, but to feel the emotions of the people, the characters that are in this story. And you really get a sense of just how shocked Isaac was, and how much. And I think this is kind of his wake up moment, where he started to realize just what had happened, and he's shocked because of Jacob. But I think also because immediately he says, then Isaac trembled very violently and said, "Who was it then that hunted game and brought it to me?" He knows the answer to that at this point. He's come to realize this has got to be Jacob. And I ate it all before you came, and I have blessed him. And then he says this. He says, "Yes, and he shall be blessed." He realizes that, he's the one all along that was supposed to get the blessing.
Yeah, I think that's going to be reinforced in actually a few verses, because before Isaac sends Jacob out to Laban after these events, in verses 3 through 4 of chapter 28, he gives him a more complete Abrahamic blessing. So I think at that point he's not kicking against it anymore.
Right.
He has realized, okay, whether it was because of his deception or God's will, like he is the chosen one now. However, Isaac is thinking about this, he realizes that what's done is done, and he is now the firstborn of his family and God's elect,
Right.
following in Abraham's footsteps.
Right. Right.
So, going back to where Esau, he is crying out. He has been oppressed by Jacob, essentially. And in verse 40, Isaac, the only thing he can give to him is to say, okay, one day you're going to get tired of Jacob's lordship and you're going to throw it off. You're going to rebel against him, essentially. And just want to point out that actually finds its fulfillment in 2 Kings 8, verses 20 and 22, whenever Edom, along with another nation, throw off Jacob's rule over them, Israel's rule over them. And so this is the beginning of where Edom becomes an enemy nation to Israel, and they keep following that fate until you get to the book of Obadiah, where they have attacked Israel, and Obadiah is just railing against them that Yahweh will destroy them to defend his people and bring out a remnant, but nonetheless they have acted as an enemy of Yahweh. So this is not a... So yeah, this is kind of a mixed... As far as like what we're supposed to feel about this as the readers, there's kind of a mixed response there, because on the one hand, okay, there's a hope for Esau to get out from underneath Isaac, but at the same time, that's not a good thing, because what is, as Christians, what are we? We're slaves of Christ.
Right.
And to become the servant of someone, to become the slave of someone in this culture in the Bible, is you're becoming part of their household. If you did not have anything, you would willingly become the slave of someone else so that you would have a home and food and way to take in some of the blessing of your master. And so that is what we are doing with Jesus. We have become his slaves and come into his household, and he is bestowing on us as his family and as his servants and as his household, all the different metaphors used to describe us. We are partaking in his blessings that he gives. So Esau would have been better off staying true to Israel, and even though, yes, they were oppressed, Israel was the means through which God was going to bless the nations. Israel completely messed up their job, but they should not have become enemies of Israel. They really, probably more or less, should have stepped back and just waited on the Lord to come and make Israel into what it should have been. But that's a kind of an aside. So let's keep moving with the story here. After all this, in verse 43, Jacob, he flees because he hears that Esau wants to kill him. And again, just another Exodus point. Hagar fled in Genesis 16, and that was another Exodus story we talked about. And then also the Israelites are going to flee in Exodus 14, verses 5 through 9. So again, more Exodus points in Jacob's Exodus that he's going to have, which will start in just a few minutes.
So would that be an Exodus or an exile?
Well, okay, yeah. He's going out into exile, but it's the beginning of his
Exodus story. Okay.
Exodus.
Gotcha.
Right. And so, as he's planning to flee, Rebekah comes to him in verse 43, and here's what she says. She says, "Now therefore, my son, obey my voice, arise and go to Laban my brother in Haran, and stay with him a little while until your brother's fury turns away." And then here, verse 45. "Until your brother's anger turns away from you, and he forgets what you have done to him. Then I will send and bring you from there." And I think that's a significant statement, because in the Exodus pattern that we've seen throughout the book and in the actual book of Exodus, the pattern is Yahweh is the one who delivers, or Yahweh's elect when he empowers them to do so. Here, Rebekah, she has set up this whole deception, and then she promises to send Jacob into exile and then bring him back, to give him exodus from his exile. And I think just given the pattern that we've seen developed in Genesis so far, that is a bold claim. And I'm pretty sure that after the next few verses, she does not appear in the story again except for passing reference in genealogies.
No, in fact, she doesn't even get any, like all the other patriarchs and their wives, you learn about their death story, right? And she doesn't even get that. Her nurse does. Like,
right. Her servant gets one. She doesn't,
but
intentionally to leave her out of the narrative because I think of this.
Yeah, I think so too. Yeah,
she's lost her place in the elect family by... kind of like Jacob in a way, just being like the serpent in order to obtain what she wants. And really we don't get any story of her coming back around like Jacob does.
Yeah, which I think, like we said before, I mean, that even emphasizes more that her motivation wasn't to be true to the prophecy that was given to her at birth.
She was just the mirror of Isaac.
Yeah, she was just...
exercising her favoritism.
Because Isaac, for whatever reason, maybe because he was the one who stayed in the house and they formed a bond, but for whatever reason, and we're going to see later on in Jacob's life, favoritism causes all sorts of chaos with him and his kids too.
Right. Yeah. And so the result of this is that, again, Rebekah is going to send Jacob out to Paddan Aram to go to Laban, and we see at the very end of chapter 27, she comes to Isaac and just gives this excuse, hey, our other son took these Canaanite wives, we don't like them that much, let's send Jacob away so that he can go get a wife from our family. Great idea. So that's where chapter 28 picks up, and let's work through the first little bit of chapter 28, because that's really what rounds out this narrative block. So after this suggestion has been pitched that Jacob's going to go out to Paddan Aram to meet Laban, Isaac agrees and says, yes, we'll send him away. So in verses 3 to 4, this is what he says to Jacob. God Almighty bless you and make you fruitful and multiply you, that you may become a company of peoples. May he give the blessings of Abraham to you and to your offspring with you, that you may take possession of the land of your sojournings that God gave to Abraham. So here's where Isaac, like you've said, he's come around now, and whether for good or bad reasons, he has realized that Jacob is the elect of God. He is the one following in Abraham's footsteps, who will have the land, who will have the blessing, and who will ultimately be a light to the nations.
Now the difference here, though, I think, is Abraham made it clear that he did not want his son Isaac to leave the promised land.
Yeah.
But here Isaac is sending his son away.
And I think this is, again, just probably another failure of Isaac.
Right.
He should have kept him there and found a servant to send him off to get him.
Right.
Because there's always the risk that, hey, he's going to stay there.
Right.
And develop his family out there. Either that, or maybe he sees that Yahweh's just going to make it happen at this point, so it doesn't matter what he does. But I think probably we're just within the tensions of the narrative so far, we're supposed to read this as, okay, he's listening to his wife now, and there's another one. Maybe they were supposed to pick up on that too. He listened to the voice of his wife, just like Eve and Sarah.
Yeah.
So, that one's a maybe, but I think that might be in there as well.
It seems like they're this pattern.
Yeah, I think this is supposed to be read as this is a failure. Rebekah comes and she offers something, and Isaac that's a great idea, let's do it. It's a really bad idea, and it leads to Jacob's fall, essentially, because it results in his exile out of the land.
Right.
Although the entire past chapter has been a fall narrative, but
right,
all the same.
Right.
So,
well, in all of this, I think you see God's providence working, maybe behind the scenes, even, because even in the next story when he goes into exile with Laban, I mean, he experiences the same kind of deceptiveness that he gave out to his father, and so I think it's all God uses all of this. I don't know if it was necessarily planned out meticulously by God in this way, but it's obvious that this is all part of God's plan.
Yeah, I would love to see the version of the story where Jacob he waited on the Lord and see how it would have played out.
Right.
But
right.
I guess this is the version we get. Which I guess we get that with Abraham. He's the faithful waiter who waits for decades upon decades upon decades to get the promises. And
Kind of.
Yeah. That's true.
Hagar.
After a couple slip-ups.
Yeah. He wasn't perfect either.
Yeah.
But, and I think that's the pattern that we've seen throughout this, that Abraham and Isaac, and obviously with Jacob, God's faithfulness in spite of their lack of obedience and their lack of faith, and they just keep messing up. And even it does seem like there's this, they keep getting worse too. Like Abraham does a few things that were wrong, and then Isaac does a few. Isaac we just don't know as much about, but the things we do know, it doesn't really paint him in a good light for the most part.
His story doesn't end well.
It doesn't end well, yeah.
He passes his main test,
right? Staying in the
this
land,
climax, but then after that he just kind of falls off.
Yeah, so there's a mixed bag with both Abraham and then Isaac, and then Jacob. He's messed up, like you said, almost to the very end.
Mm-hmm. And I don't think we're supposed to come away with this and say, okay, Isaac was not one of God's people.
Sure,
I think he messed up, but we continue with he passed his test, he maintained loyalty to Yahweh, and then beyond this, God is still known as the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob.
Yeah.
And so I don't think we should read into this a whole lot of his story ended with sin, therefore he's saved and he's unsaved, and
No, I don't think this is about salvation.
Right.
I think it is about the elect, but we need to be careful not to equate election with salvation all the time.
Right. Yes.
That's a whole other podcast.
We'll tackle it one day, maybe. But Okay, so all this blessing finishes up, and in verse 5, Jacob is sent away, which that word sent away, shalach, is found throughout the Exodus narrative. I think this might even be kind of a reversal of the Exodus motif in the sense that Jacob is getting deliverance from his brother by being sent into exile, and it also is the beginning of his need for an Exodus. So that word shalach, it just shows up in a lot of some places that aren't significant, but it also shows up in places that are very significant with relation to the Exodus motif. So I think it's worth paying attention to the fact that Jacob here, he is sent away, which is typically where exile ends. So with that, the story wraps up just with a little a note about Esau's wives.
So again, he marries somebody not from the Abraham line.
Yeah, he has his 2 Canaanite women that he knows his parents don't like, so he takes a daughter of Ishmael.
Right, which is,
yeah.
I guess it's maybe a little bit better, but
It's within the family. So
yeah, it is within the family.
I think that one's probably permissible. Maybe that's where Jacob should have went.
Yeah, but it makes another connection between Esau and Ishmael, though. I think that we're meant to see that.
Well, I wondered, too, if it's not supposed to make a connection between Esau and Lamech, the first polygamist, which with Abraham, whenever he engaged in polygamy, was a negative characterization. I don't know that we're supposed to equate Abraham and Lamech, but I think just the polygamy started with Lamech, and so whenever we see that show up, like it's negative characterizations.
Right.
And, yeah, we're just seeing that the first violent, vengeful polygamist was Lamech, and now we also have Esau.
Right. Yeah, and they've highlighted that now twice because he had Hittite wives, plural, and then now he's gone and found another wife from the Ishmaelites.
Yeah, and I don't know if we're supposed to actually equate or link Esau and Lamech, but it's still that it's a negative act. It turns them into a bad character, and we're supposed to see that come out.
Yeah,
and these little similarities, they're legitimate. We see that and see how they're both similarly bad characters. And with that, I think we'll pick up next time with Jacob's dream, and as he goes on into his journey. That the dream might be a whole episode in of itself. We'll see how that goes. But we made it through a chapter and a half, and that is more than we have done, I think, since we've started.
That's pretty impressive.
Yeah.
It was a long chapter, too.
It is. Well, cool. All right. We'll pick back up with Jacob's dream next time around.
Sounds good.